Hi, my name is Terrence Evans, and I'm a black West Indian Canadian. My parents moved here in the late 50s, striving to do what every other parent who moved here, or every other person that moved here in that time period and beyond, strives to do, to get a good job, raise a family, buy a house, or maybe not in that order. My parents succeeded. They ended up having me and my sister, and I grew up in Vancouver in the late 70s and 80s. They sent me to some of the most affluent schools in Vancouver. I wore a uniform and I went to school and sat in class like all the other kids, and I was supposed to be just like all the other kids. But for some reason, when I sat inside of the classroom, I never truly felt as if I belonged. I never felt like all the other kids, because when recess would come around, everybody was my best friend. Everybody wanted me on their team, because simply, I was better than the best. This is something that rang true to me from my parents. My mom, she always used to say, "Terrence, you have to be better than the best." But what does better than the best mean to a 9, 10, and 11-year-old child growing up in Vancouver as a black child? Well, it means simply that. You have to be better than the best. And I was. So I would be on everybody's team. Everybody wanted me. But as soon as the game was over, or recess was done, everybody would run to me to touch my hair, to feel how spongy it was, and touch my skin to feel how different it was. But truly it wasn't. It was just a different color. I would go home after school, and on the news while we're eating dinner would be pictures of Martin Luther King being shot, Jimi Hendrix dying, black people suffering and struggling to get ahead in the South. And truly, it was only 10, 15-second clips. We really wouldn't hear anything about it. But I felt something inside. I felt that something wasn't right. And after 30 plus years, I finally was asked to do this interview. And how ironic that this interview was someone by the name of Anne Lewis. Anne Lewis is a lady who took the struggles and the experience of black children and men just like myself through decades and years and generations and turned it into a story, history that people can truly understand. I was able to actually meet Jack O'Dell. Jack O'Dell fought hand in hand with Martin Luther King. And so these two people brought to me an understanding of what my people and my generation and my race have lived through up until now. And so I would like you to take this story and not just listen to it, because it's not a story. It's the history of a people. It's taken generations and lives for this to come to you, not to just sit on, but to pass it on to make sure that we never go back there. This is the story of a lady named Anne Braden.
Well, if there's a film that I think exemplifies the Justice Forum, it's the Anne Braden Southern Patriot film. So that was really such a beautiful film to watch, and I'm full of just all goosebumps from watching that film. So the format that we're going to follow now for the question and answer, we're first going to have Jack O'Dell come up to the stage, and he's going to speak for a few moments. And then following his address, then Anne Lewis, the filmmaker, is going to come and join him at the front for an extended question and answer period. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of a biography on Jack O'Dell. He's a legendary civil rights activist, strategist, and organizer with a lifetime of experience in the U.S. civil rights, anti-poverty, and peace movements of the 20th century. His career spans the National Maritime Union in the 1940s, with underground left in the South in the 1950s, where he met and collaborated with Anne Braden. Freedom Ways magazine and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, where he worked closely with Martin Luther King Jr. in the 1960s, and the Rainbow Push campaigns of the 1970s and 80s. In the early 1960s, Jack held a leadership position in the Martin Luther King Jr. Southern Christian Leadership Conference. Determined to sabotage the civil rights movement, former FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover used Odell's prior Communist Party membership to force him to step down. Since retiring to Vancouver with his wife Jane Power in the 1990s, the now 89-year-old Odell has focused on speaking with young activists and passing on his knowledge to a new generation. So I'd like to welcome Jack Odell to the stage.
I'm very delighted to be here. We rejoice and are exceedingly glad that the Doxa Film Festival has chosen this wonderful film by Ann Lewis and Mimi Pickering. Has brought to the attention a piece of American history and has underscored the importance of documentary film in our lives today. I learned a great deal from this evening of experience. I have to kind of digest it. It's one of the most effective and well-done films I've ever seen. I've seen a few films. Because the detail is there, and the sense of purpose, and the sense of direction, the compassion, the humanism, the importance of integrity, all of these qualities are in this film. I hope that we have had the privilege of seeing this. We'll be able to work out a scheduling that will enable others, perhaps in other venues, to share this kind of experience that we have had. This film is a masterpiece of documentary work, and it is the kind of art that lives with us if we digest it. It's the kind of art that turns our mind to goals and achievements that really matter. And there's so much in this film. I'm just glad we had a chance to see it. When Dr. King was coming out of his first attempt upon his life in New York in 1958, where there was an attempted assassination on him, and the press asked him, what does your movement hope to achieve? And his remarks were, we hope to achieve a nation at peace. A nation at peace with its own conscience. That is a powerful observation. And Anne Braden's contributions, her life story, centers around this question of our conscience. I saw people in this film who had many more opportunities to work with Anne than I did. I knew of them, and I knew the work they were doing. But I knew in Anne Braden a person who had a deep dedication to justice. when you heard her say that segregation is simply wrong, that is an observation that is filled with humanism. And when she acted upon this, she did so in concrete ways to make it real. So I want to just, before we have our question and exchange, outline 3 or 4 things that I think are related to how we keep alive this tradition. She said segregation is simply wrong. Millions of Americans thought that it was fine. They thought the very opposite. But she acted upon that with a sense of the new consciousness she had when she and her husband Carl decided to help this black family have a home. Now, other things were going on at the time, some of which were alluded to in the film, you know. The Supreme Court had said that in the field of education, the doctrine of separate but equal is unconstitutional. But Anne was helping a black family buy a home in a white neighborhood. You see, the interest in keeping segregation alive by just through the courts getting this or that part of the segregation system reduced or nullified, but leaving things very much intact. Can we imagine what it means for a black family to buy a house in a white neighborhood when we have seen this even in the North? Redlining, blacks couldn't get down payments for a house. When Dr. King took the movement to New York to deal with open housing, he said that was the worst situation he had ever seen in his life. The violence. People were up in the trees throwing down rocks at the marchers. Now, the house is a form of ownership, obviously. And the mythology that was cultivated is that if a black family moves into your house, the value of that house is going to deteriorate. This is one of the underpinnings of the big lie technique that there must be segregated neighborhoods. But Anne Braden and them broke through that. Now, this house, the house question, you know, a man's home is his castle. Look how many times blacks would try to move into a house. We can remember times in Birmingham when we had to stand armed guard at a house because it was been threatened with bombing by the Ku Klux Klan. But here is an act of conscience that said, well, in enabling this family to move into this house, and look at the price paid. But we should also look at the systemic character of this question of a black family buying a house in a neighborhood. So, in a white neighborhood. So, the black family would take the risk of buying the house. Then there would be a campaign in many places for the white family around there to move, and they better sell quickly because the blacks are coming. And so they would sell the house to the real estate agent for less than the house or work, just to get out of there and move. And when the black family moved in, the price went up more than the white family was paying. So the real estate lobby, the real estate interests, were able to profit off of the sense of urgency and off of this racist ethos. It pays good money. So acting upon our consciousness that we have acquired is the next step to acquiring consciousness. It's the next step to being at peace with our consciousness. The next step, beyond beginning to act on our consciousness, is to inform our consciousness with information. Anne Braden's Southern roots makes her aware of the fact that President Roosevelt in 1938 gave a speech to the nation, a fireside chat, in which he called attention to the South. 1/3 of the nation, he said, ill-clothed, ill-housed, and ill-fed. That is the legacy of racism. It's the legacy of institutional racism. Overcoming this was what the promise was. We're entering the World War II period. And this question of a good life after the war. The Atlantic Charter was adopted. Freedom from want, freedom from fear, freedom of religion, and freedom of assembly and political associations. This was the aim of the war, according to the Atlantic Charter, which was adopted by President Roosevelt and Winston Churchill on an aircraft carrier outside Quebec. And so the Atlantic Charter was one of the documents that outlined what the intentions of the Allies were. The black community took this seriously, and we adopted a double V campaign. Victory abroad, yes, we want to fight fascism, but victory at home as well. And of course, we had our own examples of the war. Camp Claiborne in Louisiana, where I was living at the time before going into the Merchant Marines. Prisoners of war from Germany were being brought back to Camp Claiborne in Louisiana and held as prisoners of war. And black troops were there to watch over them, to guard and see that they didn't break away. The Nazi troops could go into the PX that was on the camp area, but the black American soldiers who were guarding them could not. We fought the war in a segregated army, Navy, Marine Corps. They made films about certain sections of the armed forces, and you wouldn't see any blacks there. So, understanding the context within which much of the life and times of the 50s developed, being informed and the memories that serve this purpose, knowledge of the Jim Crow system and its contradictions, One of my buddies, Andy Carver, died on the beach at Salerno. We were from New Orleans. We were on the mock crew together, just a case in point. And I heard about his dying. I had to think about it. You know, he never knew what it was to be served at a lunch counter in downtown New Orleans, or to ride in the front of the bus, or. So there were many, many realities, sides that would drive us to take a stand with regards to this segregated society. And these are components in life that are instructive, obviously. And then there's the fact that organization decides everything. Once our conscience is set and our action is set, acting upon that consciousness, and our memory is placated or affirmed by the experience that tells us this action we are to take is right, then the question of organization decides everything. The white Southerners, who were our allies, had three different evolvements. In the period of FDR, it was the Southern Conference for Human Welfare, based in New Orleans. In the later period of the 50s and early 60s, it was the Southern Conference, it was the Southern Regional Council, headquartered in North Carolina. And then AnneBraden, in the later years, formed the Southern Organizing Committee in Birmingham. You know,
I had a chance to speak with Mr. Jack Odell, and this is what he said.
Hello.
Hi, Jack.
Hello, buddy.
How you doing?
All right. How you making out?
I'm doing good. Doing good. So, you've obviously done a million of these.
Well, I wouldn't say. Each one is different and enjoyable. And
Okay.
you know, I mean,
Yeah.
I'm into conversing with folks who have something on their mind.
Exactly.
I think it's a real. Well, it's an opportunity to have exchanges. I consider it a gift, really. You know,
Yes.
to be able to have the opportunity to talk with some folks who want to expand your knowledge and expand theirs.
Exactly.
You know, that's where it's at.
So give me a little bit of background on you with Martin Luther King. That really kind of struck a chord with me. I was like, oh, wow. What did you do with Martin Luther King?
Well, I did two things with him. I met him through Stanley Levison. I met him through Stanley Levison directly
Yeah.
when I had a chance to talk with him. But prior to that, there had been a march for integrated schools, youth march for integrated schools, in 1958, 9 in there.
Yeah.
And it was a student effort to check the rise of these white citizens councils,
Okay.
but base it on the population. So it was a march to Washington and petition campaign. And I was district director of a black insurance company in Montgomery at the time.
Okay.
And so I wrote Dr. King and told him that I thought that this was a great opportunity to tie in the present generation of young people, and that I was willing to volunteer and be the Southern organizer for that, because I had contacts through my fraternity,
Yes.
Alpha Phi Alpha, and of course Dr. King was an Alpha also.
Okay.
So I took up that responsibility, in short, And that brought, I guess it brought the work to the attention of people in New York who were organizing the march.
Yes.
And they wanted to know more about me and so forth. So after that, I was asked to do, I left Montgomery, and I started to work with this core group that came out of Bayard Rustin and them, who had worked with the sister's name. Anyway,
Rosa Parks?
From the time of Montgomery.
Okay, yes.
They had been working with him. So they got in touch with me and said, well, we would like for you to do some other things.
Mm-hmm.
And because I visited all the campuses using my Alpha Phi Alpha connections, and then the youth circulated the petition through the chapters.
Wow.
And then they came to Washington.
Wow.
So I said, hey, wait, that's cool.
Yeah.
So that was the beginning. And then simultaneously with that, we were trying to build out of New York a SCLC office that could raise some money for the movement in the South.
Yes.
Because all the money was being raised by Dr. King, traveling and speaking.
Yes.
But both the size of the activities that he had to cover and the size of the bills.
Yeah.
You have to hire a staff, and pay them.
Yes.
Not rich, but just basic.
Yeah.
So we decided to go into direct mail fundraising, and so Stan Leveson he had a brother in the American Jewish Congress who was trying out direct mail fundraising. And so Stan and I discussed it and said, well, let's take this up to Dr. King and see if we can't start that. So the short of that is, we went into that, and the New York office became a fundraising office for SCLC. And, we put on the Rat Pack. I don't know if you heard of it.
No, what was the Rat Pack? What was that?
Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., and so they were famous in Las Vegas. Mm-hmm. But they'd never been out of Las Vegas. But Sammy was doing a piece had agreed to do a piece for SCLC.
And what is SCLC short for?
Southern Christian Leadership Conference.
Okay.
That's the name of Dr. King's organization.
Okay.
So he was going to do something in an auditorium in Queens. But then he was part of the Rat Pack, so he said, well, wait just a minute. Let me see if I can get Frank and them.
Exactly.
So Frank and them said yes. So we moved the venue to Carnegie Hall. And we had a very successful evening in January. It was the same week that Kennedy's inauguration in 1960. Kennedy's inauguration was on that Tuesday, and we were that Friday at Carnegie Hall.
Wow.
So it was the fundraising activity that brought me to Dr. King's attention, and it was a way of helping out. And then Bobby Kennedy was not responding to many of the things that were going on in the South the way we think he should. And the reason was that John Kennedy was he didn't believe that he had a mandate to do anything, because the election with Nixon that he'd won out was by a margin of 1 vote per precinct in the whole country.
Wow.
So he's a president who wanted to be president, but he said, I haven't got a mandate to do anything. And that would accounted for the slowness with which he was responding to the civil rights stuff. But in any case, so he said, we've got to increase the black vote. I'm going to step up my support for the black rights, but we're going to have to increase the black vote in the South, because in my next term, I will lose unless I carry the South, and the black vote is the key to it.
Yeah.
So we decided to be party. So there was all 5 civil rights organizations got together under the Taconic Foundation and set into motion a right-to-vote campaign in the South. And Dr. King selected me to be in charge of that as well. So it's like when Kennedy took him out on the lawn, and said, you got to get rid of Jack Odell. He said, well, I don't know how you say Jack Odell got time to be no communist, because he got 2 jobs with me. And I was one of the few people that actually had 2 major responsibilities.
Wow. So they actually accused you of being communist.
Oh, yeah.
Is that because you were associating with Anne Braden?
No. I had been in the Communist Party in the early part of the 50s because they got locked up. And in my union of the NMU,
Yeah.
Communists were very much. That was the oldest Seamen's Union in the country.
Okay.
It was born out here on the West Coast, along with Harry Bridges in there.
Mm-hmm.
You probably know something about that.
Yes.
But my point is that, hey, communists didn't mean nothing. Wait a minute. So a lot of people, you join the Communist Party, because the Communist Party was the party of the working class. I mean, the Communist Party was the party.
It was like today's NDP. It was like today's NDP.
Yeah. Developing the consciousness and ability, and the whole CIO, Congress of Industrial Organizations, rested upon having a different policy with respect to black workers, and that is, our position was unity. An injury to one is an injury to all, and so the CIO ordered the CIO, which was the new basic trade union movement, gained its strength and its popularity by being anti-racist, and the communists played a big part in that imagery being shaped.
Okay.
So to join the Communist Party was, I lived at 260 Convent Avenue in New York when I was in the Merchant Marines.
Yes.
That's in Harlem, okay?
Yep.
Do you know that my city councilman was a communist named Benjamin J. Davis? He elected on the communist ticket. But see, we had proportional representation. And you see what I mean? Where if you gather a certain number of votes, you get a seat.
Yes.
So it was. So how can I can vote for a communist for public office, but I can't join the party?
Yeah. Incredible.
That's the backdrop. So I had two jobs with Dr. King. I was one of the few people that on his staff that had two major responsibilities, and they were major because you had to produce on both instances.
Yes.
They needed the money, but they had to, in this arrangement that they made, that Bobby Kennedy set up for doing the voter registration stuff, you had to make monthly reports on what you were doing.
Wow.
Which is understandable. We didn't have no problem with that, but it had to be done.
Yes.
So instead, they gave me. I worked out of the Atlanta office and the New York office, and they set up an apartment for me down in Atlanta where I could stay overnight, so forth and so on, and that's the way I was working.
Wow. And so where did your interaction now with Anne Braden come in?
I met Anne Braden at a later period in the late 60s, early 70s. Because we knew things that were going on, and you pick up that things are happening. And the Braden case, of course, was a big case. This is 1954.
Yeah. And
here's a white family, that opened the way for a black family to buy a house in an all-white neighborhood. So, but it's I remember her with Sock, and that was later in her. Because you had the Southern Regional Conference, and there was an evolution. I mentioned that in my speeches the other night.
Yes,
three stages of it. But this SOC was late 60s, early 70s, I remember. And, but, I don't remember the exact meeting, except Carl Braden and I were both subpoenaed by the House Un-American Activities Committee in Atlanta in 1958. And in other words, we had a chance to talk. So
exactly.
But in 1958, the House Un-American HUAC ran into the South and had a meeting in Atlanta. One of their forays, and said the theme of this is communism in the South. Well, he and I were both among those that were subpoenaed to that particular thing. So I met him before I met Anne.
Okay.
But then I met Anne several years later. I think it was at a SCLC meeting.
Okay.
I don't remember the details of it.
Yes.
But like I say, the case of selling a house to this was a major, and then being brought up on charges
and put in prison.
Government of Kentucky is ridiculous.
Yeah.
But the ridiculousness of it, actually, hey, well, it wasn't the only ridiculous thing happening.
Yeah, exactly. And so, what did you think of the movie Southern Patriot that Ann Lewis did?
Well, I did have some initial remarks about that in my remarks at the thing. I thought it was an exceptional. Movie, and I like movies. I've been around long enough to appreciate this art. In fact, I have a to highlight because it shows a sensitivity to the various avenues. It shows a sensitivity to what good filmmaking is.
Yes.
Both visually and in the narration.
Exactly.
And with Anne Braden, of course, Anne Braden and her husband represents the potential that millions of white Southerners have for achieving this, but very few do.
Exactly.
And as I said, when she decided that segregation was simply wrong, you see what I mean?
Yeah. Yes.
That's a level of consciousness.
Yes. That's natural among black people.
That's right. That's right. But you see, it's possible among white people, but it has always been shortcoming.
Exactly.
Among white Southerners because of the education and indoctrination in churches and schools. You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
And what you compare this with, buddy, is a few years ago, about 5 or 6 years ago, the Southern Baptist Convention, that's the white Baptists in the South.
Yes.
They finally decided to open the door to blacks a few years ago. But they were white from Reconstruction time down to now.
Yes.
Okay, for the most part. It started about 1870 or something like that. The Southern Baptist Convention passed a resolution, and the content of the resolution that slavery was a mistake.
Wow.
Now you think about that. Slavery
was a mistake.
Is a mistake. But that's the culture Anne Braden that grows up in. You see how they had to break clean?
Yes.
Slavery is a mistake.
We don't take any responsibility for it, but it was a mistake.
No. It was a mistake.
Yes.
And, okay. And that's slavery. They didn't say that about segregation.
Exactly.
Which followed slavery. Slavery was a mistake.
Yes.
And they thought they had done something.
Yeah.
And they had, in their terms of historical advance.
They did. They admitted that slavery was wrong. Not the responsibility for it.
And when it's reduced to a mistake, it's like, we all make
mistakes. Exactly.
A mistake is something you may have had very good intention and make a mistake.
Yeah. That's amazing. One of the things that really came forth to me, though, as a black man, it was one of the things that Anne Braden said, is that our society is based upon white supremacy.
Yes.
And, while I know this, those words brought into context every single time that I've gone to court, every single time that I've argued in school, every single time that I've argued in college, it brought everything to a light. And that one statement in her movie really brought forth an epiphany for me.
And say it again.
Our society is a white supremacist society.
Yes. And it's important to be reminded of it, but the point that's being made is that people don't understand that.
Yes.
That is absurd.
Yes.
Let's start what they did to the Indians.
Yeah.
To make room for us.
Yes.
To be slaves.
Exactly.
And it's not a white supremacist society?
Exactly.
Ron, that's don't be ridiculous. What do you think? We must be just walking through life like zombies or something.
Yeah. Well, most of society is.
therein lies the rub.
Yes.
You see, we're in a constant effort at awakening people.
Thank you.
To the reality
of what
so
they're living.
We're not inventing nothing.
Exactly.
We're awakening people to the reality that because they're living in an unreality called the American exceptionalism.
Can I use that in a quote?
You can use anything I tell you, my main
Perfect.
man.
Thank you.
anything you can find useful,
All
fine.
right. All right.
That's the point of our conversation.
All right. Wow. So now, where do you see things today? I mean, they're not much different than they were, except for the side of violence. Or do you really notice an improvement or a change in how things are for, and I'm not just going to use the term black people, I'm going to use ethnic people?
Yes. Things are better than they. I can remember a time that they were worse.
Okay.
Than this, and most people over 50 can. That's one of the problems now. Is that we're hooked on the betterness of the thing and not properly assessing the deterioration that's going on.
Exactly. It's a repeating cycle.
That's it. You see.
Yes.
Oh no. Things are. They are better than they were, but they're not remaining better. They're also changing for the worse because the fundamentals of slavery didn't exist because of slavery. It existed because of greed.
Yes.
And they'll reduce some people to slavery to get the money and wealth they want to be who they are.
Exactly.
You see, that fundamental has not changed. Now it's militarism. I mean, the money they can spend on the military and also the de-development of the institutions of public life.
Thank you.
You see, the school system, the library, everything is being privatized. But what's being privatized is the money that's going into these things.
Yes. Yes.
So it's a very dangerous period in that respect. Because the substance, the social substance of things that we take for granted is being drained out.
Even more than that, the idea and the memory and the fight of it is dying with the age of the people that fought for it.
That's right. Yeah. That's correct.
Yes.
That's correct.
All right. Well, I don't want to keep you much longer. I just wanted to.
No, it's okay. But you see, this is the kind of thing that must be grasped.
Okay.
That you're looking for your reading public.
Yes.
To come to appreciate that we're now at another stage.
At this point is that all of that technology and all that wonderful spirit, which really was also people actually physically going to the square, also was organized in part by unions who were fighting way back before then, was not quite so unorganized. And yet it did bring down Mubarak, but it did not transform that society. And so I think there are limits to technology. Not to say that it isn't a wonderful development, but I think it's limited.
I concur in that general observation. I think it's very
After watching this documentary and talking to Jack O'Dell, I did manage to get a chance to talk to the filmmaker, Ann Lewis, who really put another view and a twist on the film and the history that has transpired over the last 50 years. I'm here speaking with Ann Lewis. I've heard this name before. Ann, hello.
Hi. I'm not used to being admired. Hi, Terry.
So, Anne, we recently met here at the screening of your new documentary, Southern Patriot. And let me just tell you, that was an incredible putting together of not just history, but emotions that really explained time.
Thank you very much. It's a little unusual in that it's a history that doesn't have any narration, and I think people sometimes think that might be confusing, but there's plenty of story to tell, and that avoids having to have some objective voice coming in there and telling you where you are or whatever. So it's a little bit unusual in that sense, and it was really wonderful to be part of DOXA and the Justice Forum, because it seemed as though it was just the perfect setting, and then on top of all of that, to have Jack O'Dell speak afterwards, it just made the experience absolutely wonderful for me, and I think probably for the audience as well.
Yes, it was really it was, as I told you, so much to digest that instead of sitting down and talking with you afterwards, I ran away because I seriously needed to be able to take it all in. Being a black man myself, it was quite emotional. And then given the views of Anne Braden, and just the format that this movie was put together was incredible. Now, before we get on to a little bit more about the movie, I want to get into Anne Lewis herself. Who is Anne Lewis?
Okay. So I grew up during the 60s, and I grew up in Washington, D.C., which was at that time, the city was about 80% black. And in the absolute throes of that mass civil rights movement, my parents did not work for the government, and I grew up in quite an integrated neighborhood. In fact, I remember in the city itself, I remember when the decision came down on school desegregation in the U.S., which was 1954. I was in the first grade at that time, and they walked black children into our classroom. Mm-hmm. And I remember that experience. So I had at least a little taste of what the South was like under Jim Crow and under that kind of rigid segregation. And then I had a much bigger taste of what it was like to transform that, to get rid of that.
Yes.
And that's and that's kind of my background as a child, just becoming pretty early on aware that there were things that were really wrong, and then realizing that it was possible to change things. I mean, all of us really thought that we were going to make major social change by, I think the date was 1973 or something like that.
So this experience, was this the thing that inspired you to start, I guess let's call it advocating through visual images about the unfairness, or what started you into making the films?
So I went off to Berkeley because I thought that would be an interesting place to study science.
Okay.
And rapidly dropped out.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
It was too conformist for you.
Yeah. Well, at that time it was very interesting because what they were doing, they were having a free speech movement on the Berkeley campus, and at that time they were taking away all of the gains of the free speech movement, and the incoming governor was Ronald Reagan.
Okay.
Who had done everything he could to destroy any kind of academic freedom, and certainly destroy any kind of student movement. Calling people long hairs and hippies and so forth and so on. And also at that time, people were becoming very involved in protesting the Vietnam War, and I was certainly involved in that. And when I say I was involved in these things, involved in civil rights, involved in the Vietnam War, it was always as somebody who was not in leadership. It was always as someone who was just kind of with the crowd and willing to,
supporting,
wanting to be a part of things that were going on for all kinds of motives.
Yes.
I mean, I don't think I had as strong good do-gooder instincts as a lot of people. I was kind of a tough kid.
Yeah.
And, but I sure wanted to be a part of stuff that was exciting, and,
Yes.
and I think I did have some moral commitments. I hope I did. But that was what people who were, there was a cultural revolution going on as well.
Mm-hmm.
And that's eventually what I got involved with after a year of escape to Mexico and then coming back and all of this stuff. I ended up deciding that I really wanted to make films. And I think for all kinds of reasons, some of them political, some of them artistic.
Okay.
And went to New York in order to learn how to make films and got involved with a group of a very alternative program called Filmmakers on the Bowery. And we just made films and projected them up in Central Park, and it was all very experimental and a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And then I went to an art school, which I, again, kind of dropped out of because Nixon invaded Cambodia and we all went on strike. So that's a good thing to drop out of school.
Yes,
right?
yes.
So it was kind of like I was pretty young at the time, and I was just kind of learning about stuff, and it was exciting. There was all kinds of ideology around. You could really look at that. There were all the national movements in Africa
Mm-hmm.
that were very interesting. There were socialist experiments that seemed to be more successful. Some of them more successful than others. There was a kind of a life to the society that was very young and very vibrant, and people were rebelling all over the place. And it was all a very good time to grow up to young adulthood. But what really changed me was when I worked on a film called Harlan County, USA, and that was almost by accident, and it was a film about the United Mine Workers Union, and began as a rank-and-file takeover of the union, and then the film progressed into an organizing drive in a very remote part of the country, eastern Kentucky, with a fairly militant history.
Yes.
And that experience changed me.
What happened there to change you? Like, was there a specific incident that happened, or was it?
Well, I think it was gradual. It was, my grandparents were immigrants, and they were working class. My grandmother was illiterate. They were. I was kind of one generation removed from the working class, and I think I developed the great thing about that film was the absolute power and integrity of the coal miners that were on strike and also their wives.
Okay, yes.
I mean, it was a real lesson for me in the power of collective action.
Yes.
And the importance of that, and the importance of a kind of a more subjective, with the people filmmaking,
Yes.
that you really could take sides and still tell the truth, that you didn't have to be objective in a documentary. In
Yes.
fact, if you try to be objective, you aren't anyway, and it comes out that you really do end up lying. So it's not just about what you're about. So the film itself was transformative for me, but also the experience of living in that culture and with those particular people that were active at that time in eastern Kentucky. And I ended up marrying one of the striking miners and living in eastern Kentucky for 25 years. So I
Okay.
was, not only did I go there to make a film, but then I ended up sticking around afterwards. And making films there. Nearly all of my work has been based in Appalachian, Kentucky.
Yeah, I was. I was looking. I was looking at some of the films that you've done. I mean, you've done stuff like Morristown, In the Air and Sun. Of course, the latest one here, I guess, is the Anne Braden Southern Patriot story. But there's so many more. There's Texas Majority Minority. The Mine War, I guess, is what you just talked about. Oh, no, on Blackberry Creek. Is that the right one?
Yeah, that's about a real horrible man and a horrible strike. It's about a guy who people may know of him in Canada even, named Don Blankenship, who was one of the biggest people that absolutely denied global warming and ran his company with a vengeance, which is APMACT coal. It's the company that's responsible for the latest really big U.S. Coal mine fatality disaster.
Okay.
I think 97.
Yeah, I remember that. I remember that, yes.
Yeah. So I did a very early film on him when he was still kind of an accountant in 84. And then that got picked up. Pieces of the interview with him got picked up by Bill Boyers and people like that. So that's why you see that.
Okay.
I think, my interests have been around working people, union struggles. Morristown is about immigration, but it's and factory fly out of the country, but it ends in an incredible lopsided victory for predominantly undocumented workers at a poultry plant in the U.S. South, and they win a union election by 400-something to 18.
Wow.
So it's the only, I like to talk about it as though it's the
I was in a prison, and life builds prisons around people, and I had prison that I was born white in a racist society. I was born privileged in a classist society. I don't know that I could have ever broken out of what I call the race prison if I hadn't dealt with class. It's that assumption that is so embedded in you that you don't realize it's there, that your crowd is supposed to be running things.
They took him down there, and they asked him, was he a communist? Has he been a communist or a member of the Communist Party? And he refused to answer the questions on the ground of the First Amendment. The First Amendment is freedom of association, freedom of speech.
She and Carl were charged with sedition and overthrowing the whole state of Kentucky because they bought a house for black people.
The anti-communist sort of hysteria that was gripping the country and the anti-black hysteria all got rolled up in a ball and hurled at us. We were traitors to our race, we were communists, we were evil, we were the devil.
You can't kill an idea anyway, especially if somebody else catches hold to it.
Nonviolent direct action was people themselves taken to the streets. The black movement in the South shook the whole society. It was like the foundation stone was hit and the whole structure shook because it brought everything into question.
The men who pulled the triggers that killed 5 people here on the streets of Greensboro are dangerous men, but they are not the cause of our problem. The real danger today comes from the people in high places, from the halls of Congress to the boardrooms of our big corporations, who are telling the white people that if their taxes are eating up their paychecks, it's not because of our bloated military budget, but because of government programs that benefit black people. Our problem is the people in power who are creating a scapegoat mentality.
I don't think guilt is a productive emotion. I never knew anybody who really got active because of guilt. Everybody white that I know has gotten involved in this struggle got into it because they glimpsed a different world to live in. The meaning of life is in that struggle that human beings have always been able to envision something better. I don't know where they get it, but that's what makes human beings divine, I think. All through history, there have been people who envision something better in the most dire situations. That's what you want to be a part of. You want see the fruit of it, but that's what you want to be a part of.